We'll get started then. Welcome to the first session of the last day at CAT 2013. For this session, we are pleased to have Chris Phillips, the IT architect at CANARIE, to present on all things Eduroam.
Thanks. Check 1, 2. Are we good? We're good. First of all, I want to say thank you. This is a tough time slot to be in, and it's so great to see people here. I think we had a great time last night, and hopefully this morning I add a bit more to your knowledge about Eduroam. And I'm really jazzed about the service, and I hope you can see some of the interesting things we've been doing with it. And so today's presentation about Eduroam, about all things Eduroam, because we've been doing so much with it. What we're going to talk about today are these 3 areas. We're going to talk about what we've been doing as Canadian operations, streamlining the configuration, and introducing some of the tools to the community that if you've been talking to me directly, you might have been hearing some things about it. And I also want to give folks a glimpse into the future of Eduroam, both in the domestic environment here in Canada and internationally. For those who don't know, I'm actually involved in the Global Eduroam Governance Committee. We're very fortunate to have a place on there, and I was also fortunate to be elected to the chair of that. And what that is the Global Eduroam Governance Committee is an organization that is the steering group for Eduroam globally, which has coverage in 60+ countries, along with another 30 countries piloting the service. So last week I was in Europe, and we were talking about presenting on some of the technical details of what Eduroam as an international service is looking at to expand it. So my goal for today is really to inform, and I'll ask for a show of hands on who's here is signed into Eduroam already. Great. So for the people who didn't raise their hand, I won't call you out. I'll just say the person next to you, just give them a little rip. And we would love to see you on board. And some of the things today are about explaining what has been going on and what some folks have been doing. So the theme that I've been hearing the last little while is Wi-Fi is the new Ethernet. There's something for mobility. It's about the wireless. I don't know about you, but at home I'm not connecting many things, if anything, besides the router to a wired connection at home. And I think you can see around here the same is true. And this is just a view from yesterday of the past 1 hour activity. I don't have a timestamp on this one, but the number of sites that are connected, these are the domains that we see going by. And in the chart here, the blue is the number of authentications, and the yellow is the number of distinct users. And as you can see, there's quite a few discrepancies between one user, one device. And we know that's just not true. You're carrying a smartphone. Some people, when you travel, you're actually carrying 2 because you don't want to get stung by the roaming plan. And you have a tablet, and you have a laptop, and you just have a lot of devices. And so you're just slurping up those IP addresses, and you're also a footprint on an organization, on their infrastructure. So if you didn't have something that had the ability to have roaming capabilities, that site institution that would host a conference would be on the hook for providing guest IDs or creating a Wi-Fi identifier, which is okay, but you don't necessarily know who's actually on the other end. You may have a MAC address. This is actually from this morning. So I did a bit of stats analysis from our federation servers here in Canada to see what was going on here at CANARIE, particularly in this network access point. And this is a logarithmic scale, because we had to show, or we wanted to show, that the number of authentications are going on, there's thousands in a particular day for the people who are visiting. And I went back to, I think this is last Thursday, to kind of give a baseline to say what was happening on campus in this particular area, and then what happens when you have people coming to visit. So you see a big chunk of people joining and living on the Wi-Fi here in Eduroam, and you see that their authentications are quite large, and so that multiple device comes through. Another way to look at it is the stack chart that we get to see the number of domains that are coming through, and this just shows just how there is roaming. You don't see it necessarily, and that's why I use a logarithmic scale, because you don't necessarily see all those people who are mobile users, whether they're from your campus or they're from somewhere abroad internationally. And on that previous 2 slides previously, there were a couple of domains that were international. And so those are folks who are benefiting from Eduroam, just like your folks would as well. I've had a posting on the day in the life of Eduroam, and what we did here is we took a snapshot on, in this case, it was Sunday. And the reason we chose the Sunday, because it was an odd. We were trying to say, well, how come there's so much traffic on a Sunday? Because aren't these people like not on campus? What are they doing? And we wanted to take a view of what's going on. And so what we did is we zoomed in on a particular institution. We masked it for this particular set of information. But as you can see, there's a trend that there's a site that's bucking the trend a bit, and we wanted to dig into it. And the reason I'm going through some of these things is a common question that's posed to us is, there's this Eduroam, I'm doing this work, is it really used? And the answer is yes. And so who benefits from the service? Well, if your site is an Eduroam site, you're offering a service of saying transit and allowing people to sign in to your infrastructure, but your users, your mobile users, are also benefiting as well. And so a good illustrative point here is they're not just benefiting here in Canada, but they're benefiting worldwide. So as you have researchers who are mobile, students are mobile in placement, there's some institutions in Canada that have a high degree of placement activity, and I think we can see some of that from here. Whoops. When you take a look around, there's stuff in the reach of Eduroam is in South Brazil as well, in Europe, Portugal. There's the Asian Pacific Rim over here, Hong Kong. And when you zoom in, we as the Federation operators have the ability to see the outer information in transit. So Eduroam as a service is secure, and it uses SSL tunneling, so we don't see anything on the inside, the user ID or the password credential. That's really only between the supplicant device, like your iPhone, your laptop, or whatever. This device to your authentication point is encrypted in a tunnel. But what we do see is the origin of the request and the destination. And that's how we can get this information. But there's a lot, in this particular 24-hour period, it was quite impressive just how many people were actually signing in from that domain. And within Canada, we could probably guess that this domain is from somewhere in Eastern Ontario, given the number of sign-ins and the proximity. There was still a lot of access across Canada. And our users are mobile. They're not 9 to 5. Students are always, people are always trying to walk around campuses, or they're doing work, or they're finding where that signal is, and they're gravitating to those spaces. And just a few other things. We have the United States is also on Eduroam, so when I was looking at this, got to see some, and I believe that's Albany, and Boston, and a couple of places too. So Eduroam has a really great reach and really great coverage. And one of the things that when Eduroam transitioned to CANARIE in March of 2012, what we wanted to do is we wanted to start taking a look at the service and establishing some baseline metrics. So as the operators of the service, we wanted to make sure we're delivering a quality experience both to those who are here in Canada as well as those roaming. So what we've been doing is we've been tracking the traffic here on the number of sign-ins, which has been done for quite a few years. But in the last year, we've doubled the amount of sign-ons have doubled in the last 12 months. And that is a result of us investing in advocating Canadian Access Federation for those to join. And we've also been tracking some of the other metrics, such as what happens when your device doesn't necessarily connect. So some people may see a longer pause in the experience in connecting to the Eduroam SSID, but you do connect. What happens behind the scenes is occasionally the actual server you're trying to reach, because it uses UDP protocol, it's not always guaranteed to connect. So your device retries. We see things like there's no reply from server. And so we started monitoring that, and we started assessing, saying, where are the pressure points here to help the service keep as good as it's been, if not get better. And so what we focused on in the last few months, the last quarter or so, is reducing this and helping sites identify where some weak points are. When folks deploy Eduroam, there's some known configurations that work well, and there's some configurations that we've been identifying that don't work so well. This is one of the things that, as the Federation operator, we can help all the participants with. as you heard me mention, guest accounts are a big thing. If you don't have to provision the guest account, you don't have to put it into your identity management system. If you don't have to put it into your identity management system, you don't have to worry about deprovisioning the account. And so you can remove a lot of that activity. BCNet was in April 30th to May 1st. And again, we take a look at the baseline of just the natural traffic that was on Eduroam around that access point where BCNet was held. And you can see the huge jump in authentications here when we had a lot of visitors. And when you break it down, there was a lot of natural Eduroam traffic. So areas that, if you have an institution that has proximity to other institutions that have Eduroam, your users can be mobile between those institutions transparently, and you don't have to worry about, is that person going to have access the moment they step off my infrastructure. They have a seamless experience. For those who are in more remote places, you don't necessarily immediately get that benefit, but when you are traveling and people are traveling to you, you do have that ability of not having to provision an account. Just another example of what was happening at the BCNet side of things. The number of users and the number of devices, I put the rabbit ears back, this chart still in the system, to show the rabbit ears that people are authenticating and there's a certain set of users that are there. And I don't have the stats on the percentage there, but at the Terrena conference where there were 600 people at that conference, approximately, there was about 70% were using Eduroam at the conference center. And so that was an anomaly from a Canadian perspective. We would love to get to that level of penetration. We hope we can get there in the next few years. So I'm going to shift into the tools conversation. And well, I've had to do the meme. You know, I can't find the Eduroam signal. I hate that. So what I wanted to introduce to the community is that, you know, the Eduroam companion. So if you have a smartphone, it's on the iOS as well as the Android. You can use the Eduroam companion. So we've been publishing for a number of months now the Canadian data points for the Eduroam companion. So if you want to download it while we're talking, you'll get to see what the Eduroam companion is, and that is, it's a little bit of like a GPS to find out where is the Eduroam signal going to be in the region I'm going to, or where I am, because it can do geolocation. I don't have the fancy laptop connection to go to here, but I'll see people with their devices in their hand. And what happens here is, as the federation operator, we publish an institution.xml file. And so that XML file indicates who is in the Eduroam system. It's not the only thing that's out there. This is just a data file that is collected by eduroam.org. And they collect all the other countries' Eduroam files, and then they merge them together to the Eduroam database. And then they publish it out. This application is built by, I believe, Southampton University, and it consumes that data from eduroam.org, and you can navigate to where it is. So you can find where, if I'm in this town, where I can go to get Wi-Fi signal. So it's one example of, as part of Canadian Access Federation, you're part of a larger ecosystem. So we didn't have to build this application, but yet we get the benefit from it. So to get more benefit from it, we are asking the community to help provide some more information for it. Because we know that this is a great tool to help people find where I can get online, but those sites don't necessarily publish all their information, or their heat, like a heat map style approach, because it's a point information. Sure, we're here, but there's a whole bunch of buildings there. There's a whole bunch of access points behind there. So for those who raise their hands, and maybe some of those who are the Eduroam site admins in the audience, we encourage you to take a look at some of the geolocations that you'd like to publish about your buildings. I know one or two institutions I'm familiar with has about 100 and some buildings, and Eduroam is present in all those places, but we don't necessarily have those data points. So if you want to have a great experience for both for your users and for any of the mobile users, we encourage you to update the information. And right now it's pretty simple. We just ask you to take a look at the XML, and if you'd like to have a conversation about enriching this, just send a note to tickets@canarie.ca, and we have a trouble ticket system to track that. The other thing that we have been talking about, and I'm just checking time here to see how fast I'm going through, is the Eduroam CAT service. And so the Eduroam CAT service is a configuration assistant tool. One of the things when you deploy Eduroam on your campus is that there's certain profiles that you want to deploy. So the act of deploying and configuring your environment at times could be challenging because you have such a diverse set of tools out there. We want to try to make it as easy as possible. We participated early on in the beta testing of the tool, and we've asked a couple of site admins in our Canadian Access Federation to join in and sign in. And we're trialing this right now, and this is an introduction to this community that if you're interested in using the tool, we would love to see you to come on board. So what it helps you do is create profiles specific to your device. So some folks, it's just as simple as user NetID at realm name or at domain name, and then a password to sign in. For some others, it's not necessarily as simple as that. So the Eduroam CAT service, this is a brief walkthrough of managing your Eduroam site. So use federated single sign-on for this service. And this is a service that was created by eduroam.org and is available to every Eduroam site worldwide. And as a federation operator, we're the people that gate you into this service. So rather than having to configure some custom piece of thing on site for delivering your profiles, this is the service that allows you to help build it. We can create multiple admins and create multiple profiles for testing. When I say the royal we, that would be the site admins that are using the tool that we would delegate access to. Uses the federated single sign-on to sign in. In this particular case, we're using the CANARIE identity provider in the Canadian Access Federation. And we're part of a service called eduGAIN, and that is the international interfederation bridge. So once you're signed in, you set up the information for your institution. In this case, this is what we see as the federation operator. And you see in this right now we have, at the time I did the screenshot, we had 2 sites configured here. In order to use Eduroam and offer Eduroam, you don't necessarily have to be connected to this service. This is a service that augments your experience, and for site admins to do the detailed configuration. Some of the things that Eduroam as a service internationally recognizes that there's a lot of information about your country, the help desk, and the geolocation information are really important to help streamline the experience and manage expectations of your users in the field. Who do I call for help on this? And so you can tailor and customize your help desk configuration information. The other interesting thing about Eduroam is that in order to test Eduroam, you kind of have to go away from your campus. You can test Eduroam locally with your own user ID and your own domain, but all that does is test your loopback or local stuff. And so it's difficult to test remotely. Through CAT, you can test remotely, and you can see remote availability of other servers on demand. So if your help desk or you get escalated a ticket that said, I'm a user that's mobile, I'm roaming from such and such, I can't get on, you have the ability, if you can sign into the CAT service, to actually issue tests from here to check another domain's reachability. Some of the site details. There's a lot of detail under the hood here, and I'm just sort of skipping over the surface on some of the pieces, and wanted to sort of whet your appetite for those in the field who deal with some of the configurations. It's internationalized, so it is multilingual. It's not just English and French, and the Eduroam CAT, I think, has 19 different translations of it already. So if you have a multilingual campus, it's ready to go in that respect. As I mentioned before, you can actually test your own domain. So when you set up your Eduroam environment, you can actually issue tests through the CAT service, which is hosted in Hungary. And it would test against the Denmark and the Netherlands root servers of the Eduroam environment. So you can say, am I configured right? Is my profile right? So that's a huge value proposition, because when you have the Eduroam site, we work through the onboarding process of making sure that the connectivity is there, and we can do things from CANARIE and our offices, but we also want to be able to get that into your hands in the field, and this is a great tool to do that. The other thing that happens within the Eduroam environment is that you create profiles. So you may have a profile that is specific or under development and for the iPhones, or you may have a profile that you're testing another enhanced authentication protocol type or an EAP type. And you can build these profiles, and you can build multiples, and you can say this one is now live, and I can deliver that, or I'm working on one. So you can promote them from development to production environment. Under the hood, once you get into the profile, you start getting in some of the detail. You can deal with anonymity on the outside space, and you can change your EAP types. And so this is really at the low level piece. And what I wanted to show is that flexibility is available. Don't have to talk too much about it here, but I wanted to say, if you're looking for that depth of configuration, it's available. You can also test the profile, and again, another benefit of the testing is not just, is my domain reachable? Can I actually sign into that environment? Here, obviously temporary test accounts, because your user ID and password are actually going out over to Europe to test from there. But you can do remote testing of that profile, so you can do your quality assurance and say, yep, that's working. And if you also deal with public key, or you're using SSL certificates as personal certs for doing it, you can also deal with the certificate-based EAP type. So it's available as well. So those are two types of tools that we have available, or have available to tap in. And as I mentioned, you can gain access to this through our service that we're a member of, eduGAIN. So that's the Inter-Federation Bridge. And what that does is it allows us, as the Canadian Access Federation, our federated single sign-on piece, the other part of the Canadian Access Federation, to be able to tap into these resources. So we don't ask you to go out and create user ID and passwords. We ask you to have your identity provider to sign into there. And once you have your identity provider in the eduGAIN environment, it's safely and securely protected, because you have to have the identity provider. So let's say your site admin is part of your university, your IDP is there, and the university say, yep, this site admin is available. We'll have a 24-hour invite, one-time email that goes to the person. They click accept, and once they're accepted, that creates them as their own admin. So they can also create local admins in that environment as well. So if that institution changes or that person's role changes, it's the IDP takes care of the business. We don't have to worry about, nor does anyone else in the Eduroam environment have to worry about that account being not allowed access to that. So we really leverage the identity providers in our environment. And if you don't have a Canadian Access Federation identity provider for the federated single sign-on, my next presentation after this one talks about the identity appliance. So we'd love to have you come and check it out. So I'm going to shift a bit now. I'm going to talk about what we're going to be doing here within Canada. So for those who don't know it, the topology here in Canada is that we have our Eduroam servers are operated by BCNet. They've been doing a great job for the last, I think it's been almost 7 years now that Eduroam's been in Canada. And there's a pair of servers that are, some people affectionately know as Moose and Grizzly. And they're in Vancouver, the VanX exchange point of BCNet. And what I just depicted the CANARIE, or the CANARIE network layer there, to give you an idea of some of the transit some folks may experience. We're looking into how many people actually transit the CANARIE network when they do the Eduroam service. We expect that the vast majority of people will. And if your routes or your balancing of your routes force you over the commercial internet, that's not a problem either. I also put in the root servers here. What happens with Eduroam, if anyone that is not in the .ca realm, the radius servers will send out to these servers and then work DNS-like or hierarchical-like to distribute the traffic to the destination it needs to go to. And what we're in process of doing right now is we're actually working with BCNet. They're virtualizing the environment out here for those existing servers. We're at least 50% done on that. We're also have another VM that's going to be coming up in the Kamloops environment for the western point of presence. And in the eastern side, our new point of presence here is going to be in Ottawa on the CANARIE infrastructure. We'll have a master environment for the repository for configuration, and we've been working on some geographic diversity and expanding the capacity and working on increasing some of the automation. Right now, we do a lot of things through a change management process that is a bit more manual than we would like it to be. And we're looking at automating that so that we can streamline the time it takes to come online. The other thing that we have introduced and are promoting more now are the ticketing tools. So tickets at canarie.ca will gate you into our environment so that we can track your request more adequately. And we talked about some of the operational tools like the Eduroam Companion and the CAT.Eduroam. And so there's a lot of value in those tools as well. So looking into the future globally, what some people may not realize is just the size of Eduroam. I kind of hand waved and said there's 60 countries. So there's over 10,000 access points that broadcast the Eduroam SSID. There's 87 countries worldwide. There's 60 million successful Eduroam transactions monthly. And all those transactions actually get a tick or a record sent to the monitoring.eduroam.org site. There's a lot more transactions that include all the refused access. So there's I'd say about another 20 million transactions that go through on top of that, that are the accesses that say, yep, I successfully arrived to you, but your user ID and password didn't work. To give an idea of what happens in a given hour on Eduroam globally, this is 1 hour in May 14th. I can't remember if that's a Sunday or not. But there's a lot of different countries have different usage characteristics. On an hourly basis, on average, with Canada contrasted here, we do about 1,300 to 1,500 Eduroam authentications an hour, whereas some countries this is sort of like a Tuesday during the middle of the day on CEST, 4 p.m. And so there's some that have significant transaction volume because their penetration is close to 100% in their country. And they also have some municipalities that are broadcasting it. Another interesting statistic is there's how much national versus international transit. So there's between 10 and 13% is international traffic. Here in Canada, we hover around the 10 to 11%. And so as Eduroam looks today, here are the tunnels that happen between two different sites, and we're using a full Eduroam architecture. There are 2 root servers, there's 87 countries, and there's 10,000 sites. So when we look at predicting growth, it's hard, but we try. And so we're looking at this for preserving the quality of the Eduroam service, as well as making sure that if we're going to do something at this scale globally, we need enough runway to act. So what we did is we worked through, as some of the technical team at the International Eduroam Working Group, we did some crystal ball assumptions here of saying we would, on average, add about 10 countries a year. Each country would have about 114 domains or realms. So in Canada, we have 47, I'm looking around, I think is the number of sites that have Eduroam. And we have 1.5 million logins per month. And we average, and based on the traffic patterns that we saw in Eduroam globally, we say that each of those countries is going to about 500,000 sign-ons per month. And so if we're going to go 3 years out, they're going to require another root server, and no one has any more. And the other thing that we looked at, and we said, well, okay, the number of devices in people's hands today, that's going to be fixed. We know that's why there's a smiley face beside that. That might be a short-sighted view. And there are only 193 countries worldwide. So what does it look like 3 years out? So using these metrics, or this ratio, we expect that in 3 years' time there's going to be 117 countries. There's going to be 13,000 access locations for Eduroam worldwide. So when we look at predicting growth and looking at technology for the next stages, this is the background or the tableau that we're working with. So why would we do anything different than we're doing today? Can we just not do what we're doing today? The short answer is sure, we could do that. We could still bear the burden of the same cost of bringing a site on. We can still use the existing public key infrastructure that some of the pieces are available. But there's a couple of pieces of the Eduroam infrastructure that we would love to improve. It's been around for a decade, and over that decade, there's been incremental improvements, as well as in the last few years, there's been specific improvements around some of the things like DNSSEC, and there's going to be new things emerging like top-level domains. So in the current environment, or in the past decade, the top-level domain environment has been relatively fixed. But in the last year or two, that's going to be changing. So what happens when Eduroam needs to route those extra pieces? So what these next few slides are only a window of a larger conversation of another presentation. So if you have an interest in going down into the deep details, come see me after, and I'll connect you to the right presentation. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a surface walk across some of the things that are being thought of at the international level. And why is that important for us here in Canada? Well, we're involved in that group, and we also want to stay current. And so by participating at this early stage, it helps us keeps our infrastructure as close to the known good operating configuration, and we can see what's coming down the pipe, so we can make some strategic decisions with a little bit of sight on what some of the milestones are in front of us. So we need to continue this refresh, and we also need to break away from the curve of growth. To the point I made before of the smiley face of the devices are not going to proliferate, right? We know that's a little bit of a fallacy, because there's going to be the Internet of Things. There's going to be devices that your watch is going to start having IP addresses if Apple has its way, which I'm sure they're going to. There's going to be just so much more wireless activity, and so we're going to need to break away from the same costs. So if our growth curve is going to be a hockey stick, we don't want the cost curve to follow the same. We need to really try to plateau that, or just break away from it. So we're trying to forecast the future and take a look at that and see what the context is. And we're no longer nimble. This is Eduroam International. It's an aircraft carrier now. It's not a Corvette. It's not a smaller PT boat. The turning radius of it is significant. So there's different people on different maturity lines in the Eduroam ecosystem. So for some of those countries that have 35,000 sign-ins per hour, they've been there for the longest. They have so much penetration, so they have a lot of investment in the infrastructure. And there's going to be sites like in the Afghanistans and the Kazakhstans and other developing areas that have low-tech environments, and so they're early adopters in their region, but they're on a different maturity scale. They're just looking at, I just want to get a root server in. So they're looking to say, well, when I do this work here, I'm going to need to know what's going to happen in the 2 and 3 and 5 year. What we've done is we said, well, we need to talk about the 2 and 3 and 5 years out, but we didn't put anything into those boxes, because each one of those boxes is almost a presentation unto themselves. So one of the things that would be good to, I'll just touch on here, is that the public key infrastructure, PKIs. So right now, that hierarchy of the Eduroam side of things is really a lot about the shared secrets, SSL tunnels, and having sites having the encryption to their endpoints. Behind the scenes, the radius servers do shared secrets and their own encryption between them. But there's some better ways to do it with a public key infrastructure. The challenge with the public key infrastructure is there's at least a fixed cost in doing it well and doing it efficiently. Certainly with only 193 countries to go, or all in, that you could probably run it that way. And there is public key infrastructure in operation now. It uses the certificate service from Terena, but there's some challenges with it. Sometimes, as the stewards of Eduroam, the people who would give out those keys, they need to make decisions about who in the field are the federation operators. They don't have the ability to fly down to Brazil. They don't have the ability to go down to Spain or from Amsterdam to say, are you the person that you should have that access in the root server? So they want to work out a way that they can delegate some of that ability of trust to operating those root servers. And this is about server-to-server conversations now. So when we look at the 117 federation operator 3 years from now, and then you have these 13,000 sites, those 13,000 sites are, at Queens U, at Carleton U, at U Ottawa. That's a site. And under those sites, there's thousands of access points. So, and thousands of those, even just for one site. So when there's a decision to be made, it has a ripple effect. And so when we're talking about some of these conversations, it's really at the federation level tier. And so if we can have a solution that works well there and can be adopted lower, that's great. And the piece we're going to be talking about in just a moment are the DNSSEC and DANE piece. So we'll look here, and this looks pretty familiar, if you've seen it a couple times. What happens is when someone is here on site, they are not from the site, the Eduroam server, or the radius server here says, are you in my, do I know where to handle you? No, I'm going to go up to the CA. The federation level server says, do I know where to handle you? No. The confederation server says, okay, yeah, I know where .lu is. That's Luxembourg, realm, and then down to Restena. And so that's the site. So it's a proxying environment. There's also a cost to transit this infrastructure. So from your supplicant here all the way up here, there's a fixed cost once you get this way. Remember on the a couple slides earlier, I said there's about 10 to 13% of that international traffic. So those mobile users going from here, there's about 13% of those are the user space. And when you're talking 100 or a million users in a given sign-ons in a given month, 10% is non-trivial. So, and those people are the people who typically rely on Eduroam the most. So one thing that we're looking at is about leveraging DNSSEC and a new protocol for DANE for certificates. And the DANE standard is a way to have SSL-like or what's the right word? TLS certificates that would go into the DNSSEC zone. And what it really is at a high level is, are you in the club? That's what this part is here. This is the, are you in the Eduroam club part, and to help transit work. So when this happens, the host, the federation server says, do I know where restena.lu is? And I'll say, yeah, I know that because I'm going to query DNSSEC. And the certificate's provided. And now what happens is instead of having to traverse to the root, and I mentioned one more point on this. So us as Canadians in Eduroam environment and US folks who also have Eduroam, we actually, our authentications actually have to travel all the way to Europe and back because we're not peered with the US Eduroam servers. And this gives us the ability to really skip this peering problem right down to the, are you in the club, and start chopping off some of this transit pieces and rely on the trust that's in here. So once this SSL certificate exchange happens, to verify the endpoint, the second part is when this radius server is going to connect, it's going to talk to the actual destination point in the other country, and it's going to say, how do I know you're the right person? Well, a certificate is going to be offered, a DANE certificate, and it's going to be investigated in the DNSSEC tree. So what you're seeing now is one of the things that's being evaluated for a taste test about Eduroam and helping improve the infrastructure is about DNSSEC and how can we use the extra certificate stuff. There's still lots of ways to connect, but we're hoping that this will take us into some of these things will take us into the next decade. And it's going to take us a while to take a look at this. When I say the we, I'm speaking as the royal we of eduroam.org, not necessarily just CANARIE, but we have involvement in working through some of the details. So hopefully some of the takeaways, we're always expanding the network. Mobility is just going to get more important. Wi-Fi is the new Ethernet. And we really build on your success. And I want to say thank you to University of Ottawa and Carleton for such a great job of dealing with the network infrastructure. And it's been great to see just arrive on campus and have our devices work. And I think that's a really thing that we should give kudos to the CANARIE team for. The other thing about the streamlining stuff is we're making things easier. We really would love to see more adoption of the Eduroam companion and enriching that environment. So this is a message out to the site admins. We want your data about where your access points are. It's good for the entire ecosystem. The tools are ready for you. cat.eduroam is available right now. We have 1 or 2 sites that are trialing it. And if you want to take that next step, let us know. The other thing about looking to the future is we're investing in the infrastructure, and we're able to as a federation operator here in Canada, take our needs and bring it to the international community and have our perspective heard and have a hand in keeping our infrastructure as operating as a well-oiled machine. And I think being able to operate at that in that context adds value to everyone through and through. A wall of text on that one, but that's the presentation. Thank you very much, and I would like to talk. Oh, okay, great.
Just repeat that first.
So question of, I'll start with 3, whatever's on the top. Does the organization need a dedicated site admin? How much overhead is on the network admin? It's no more overhead on the network admins than your existing wireless infrastructure. So there's a certain bare minimum effort into you're operating your Wi-Fi, your wireless infrastructure. And this adds a little bit on top of that, but the same things of stewarding that is there. I would say, no, you don't need a dedicated person to this. I would say your existing network operations person would be the person whom we would designate on site. And that's their existing role. Who does one contact and connect to Eduroam with one contact when one can connect? So number 2 here is who does one contact when one can connect to Eduroam at one institution but not another? So the first thing is, if you're an end user, what we encourage you to do is contact your help desk to make sure it's just not a user account problem. That's the first step. Go to your home institution help service. The second one is that if your institution says, yep, everything's fine, I would say contact the local help desk. And I know from a mobility perspective, if you're only walking through the area for a few hours at a time, that's not going to be reality. But when you're a person who's actually on placement, or you're going to be there for a while, like if you're here for a couple of days on a conference, they would go to, then they in turn would escalate to their network admins. Who specifically do we contact? Get access to CAT, tickets at canarie.ca, send in your request. That would be great. And the DNS spec forbids using the protocol for passing certificates. Yes? I don't know. That's why I would go to this. I would take a look at that and cross-reference that.
I think it's correct. Not that, but in respect, it says that you shouldn't use this protocol for encoding certificates in the data. Read it.
So there are.
Not that you can't do it, but for some reason they say that you don't.
That's an interesting thing, because the same people who have been writing the DNSSEC stuff are involved on this part. So it's an interesting. That's a good question, and DNSSEC is, I would put in the same class of things as IPv6, is one of those emerging things that are important to do and important to adopt technology, because if you don't, it's just not going to succeed. And any questions from the audience here? Yes.
Can you tell us something about the American Highway plans? Just what do you know of it?
So a bit about the American Highway plans. I can't necessarily speak for them. I can give you the anecdotal information. So Internet 2 has taken over Eduroam as a service, and originally it was from University of Tennessee, but now it's there. It's folded into Internet 2 service offering, and their number of sites are coming on board fast and furious. Only recently, in the last year or so, that we've been surpassed is the number of Eduroam sites in Canada by the US. So they're moving along. I think it's great to see the adoption. Yes?
You mentioned iOS and Android. Any thoughts of a BlackBerry app that you know of for companion?
That's a good question. It's out of the UK, so I think the BlackBerry stuff just only emerged in the UK maybe a few weeks ago. And I would look to those. I don't have a good answer other than the app developers making things available. The difference between the iOS side of things and the Android side of things is on iOS, you don't get access to the Wi-Fi signal stats. And on Android, you do. So there's, I think, a variation of the Eduroam companion that actually does heat maps to allow you to report in, here's Eduroam and the site. So it gives you a richer experience. I think that is the case. I don't have 2 cell phones, so I don't have that. Yes, Phil?
I actually was able to test out the configuration last week. Unfortunately, I was homesick. I'm still suffering from laryngitis. But I was able to make some basic, 2 or 3 basic tests. And I have some other ideas we can try out. In terms of the companion, I think the thing that's important to UFG is we effectively have 3 campuses. So in terms of doing maps, that information would be useful. And I'm sure I'm going to have more questions once I actually have some time to take comparisons.
Yeah. So Philip was mentioning that University of Toronto is an early adopter of the Eduroam CAT tool, and the Eduroam companion having more detail in the maps is really important to highlight where the campus coverage is. So I think that's it for questions. Thank you very much. And I have a second presentation on identity appliance in this room. So